What is going on, Solo fam? My name is John Solo, and a few weeks ago, Disney finally released the long-awaited Cruella origin film. In said film, we're given a glimpse at the early life of the infamous 101 Dalmatians antagonist, Cruella de Vil, and see what exactly led to her becoming such a psycho. It stars Emma Stone in the role of Cruella, Emma Thompson as her nemesis, the fashion designer known as the Baroness, and a bunch of other people I don't recognize filling the roles created by the source material. Horace and Jasper, Anita Darling, and of course, Roger. Then there's this guy. I hate everything about him. Now, if you've been watching my content for a while, or at least saw my review on the recent Mulan film, you should know I'm always skeptical of these live-action remakes. A few of them have been decent, but generally they feel like pointless cash grabs that are shockingly out of touch with what audiences loved about their animated counterparts. With that being said, you'll be happy to hear that Cruella doesn't feel like that. It's got a totally original story, albeit not without its flaws, and even though they took plenty of liberties with the source material, it's far enough removed that it doesn't feel like they're tarnishing or disrespecting the original films that die-hard Disney fans loved so much. However, I would be lying if I said that this Cruella felt anything like the Cruella that we all know. She's way too cunning, calculated, and not nearly unhinged enough. And you could argue that this is in fact an origin story, so she shouldn't be an exact copy of the final result, but that's not my point. My issue is there is no way this version of Cruella is evil enough to skin 101 Dalmatians for the purpose of making a coat, which is the sole reason the character was invented in the first place. Not just in the cartoon, but in the book as well. Now, if you haven't seen it yet and you clicked on this review to help you decide whether or not Disney's $30 premiere access is worth it, you should know that both Lauren and I genuinely enjoyed this movie, and I'd recommend it to most any Disney fan, with or without the price tag. It wasn't until I sat down to write this review and really analyze the story that I realized how silly and straight up unbelievable certain parts of it are, and that's what I want to talk about today. In addition to any connections it has with the original works that we talked about a few weeks ago, of course. So that will do it for the spoiler-free section of this video. So now that we're into spoiler territory, it's time for us to talk about the story and how loyal it is to the source material, and you better buckle up because it's one hell of a story. Right out of the gate, we're shown that Cruella is one of a kind. She was born with a wackadoo hairstyle that frustratingly never gets explained, and said hairstyle is emblematic of her two personalities. She can either be Estella, who's kind and outgoing, or Cruella, who's, you guessed it, cruel. This ends up leading to trouble when she attends school. She manages to make one friend in Anita Darling, which is exactly how the two know each other in the cartoon and book, but makes some enemies in the local bullies. Also, like the book, she ends up being kicked out of school, withdrawn, which leads to her and her mother making the move to Regent's Park, where 101 Dalmatians takes place. Only before they get there, they make a stop at what we're led to believe is a family friend's, where Cruella's mother is tackled off a cliff by a pack of Dalmatians. Seriously. Not gonna lie, when I watched that happen, I stood up from my seat in utter disbelief. I thought they were pulling in, oh, she hates Dalmatians because they killed her mother. Now it makes sense, but I'm happy to say there is more to it than that. So Estella manages to escape the scene in back of a garbage truck that she rides to Regent's Park, which ironically is very similar to how the Dalmatians escape her in the book and cartoon. But she accidentally loses the priceless family heirloom her mother gave her. The next morning we're introduced to a young Horace and Jasper, her two goons from the previous movies, and Wink, who's a beacon of light in these dark days, and the trio grows up stealing everything they can from everyone they meet. So instead of her minions being a couple of nincompoops who are only good for watching TV and slapstick comedy, these two guys are unbelievably skilled, and I mean that literally. Because Horace climbs several stories worth of rope in about 2 seconds, and I'm sorry, but I've gotta call BS on that. That's like me running a marathon in record time. I have not done the training required to pull that off, and he certainly hasn't either. Now, the heist where they try to steal the necklace back from the Baroness does feel a little more like classic Horace and Jasper solely because of how much went wrong, but overall, these are not the same characters from the previous iterations. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. You might remember that in both the cartoon and book, Cruella is simply an heiress to her family's fortune, and she blows her money on extravagant furs, where in the 1996 movie, she's a fashion designer with her own label. The new movie sort of combines those qualities. They make Cruella a fashion genius from a very young age, while also incorporating the inheritance aspect in a clever way that we'll discuss discuss in just a minute. So Cruella, who's still going by Estella in her day-to-day life, gets a job as a fashion designer for the esteemed Baroness after drunkenly vandalizing a window display at a department store she worked at. But the plot twist comes in when we learn the Baroness is responsible for her mother's death. From that point onward, Cruella comes out to play, and the entire second act is her upstaging the Baroness in extremely public settings, with reporter and old friend Anita Darling helping spread the word. She also steals the Baroness's Dalmatians as an attempt to recover the family heirloom they swallowed at the failed heist I mentioned, and the scene includes a reference to one of my favorite parts of the cartoon, where we're shown dogs that look like their owners. Eventually, the Baroness strikes back and almost kills Cruella. Fortunately though, she's saved by the same man who saved her life soon after she was born, and it's here that we finally get her full backstory. Cruella/Estella is actually the Baroness's daughter, but the Baroness didn't want her and gave her to her lead henchman to dispose of immediately after she was born. I assume by feeding her to the Dalmatians, though it doesn't actually say. Instead, the henchman, named John but spelled wrong, secretly gave baby Estella to the Baroness's servant Catherine to raise in hiding. And while the Baron died from despair after thinking his first child was stillborn, in reality she's the true heir to his estate, the very same estate the Baroness is living in and presumably used to launch her fashion brand. Now, the cartoon never actually explains where DeVille's money or psychosis came from. It's just implied her family was rich. But the book specifically mentions a psychotic, wealthy ancestor of hers who bought Hell Hall with the intention of turning it into a castle, so we know exactly where she got the property and brain damage. The reason I'm getting into all this is I like how the Cruella movie did its own version of it. The wealth came from the father's side, while the insanity came from her mother. Now, from this point onward, there aren't too many connections with the earlier story, so I'm just gonna go ahead and skip to the end. Estella sets herself up to confront the Baroness in front of an entire party and get murdered by her. At least, that's what they want you to think. In reality, she channels her inner Kim Possible and uses her skirt as a parachute to land safely in the water before returning as Cruella. Oh, and then there's the obvious sequel setup where she gives Anita Darling and Roger, the Baroness's old lawyer who she indirectly got fired, each Dalmatian puppies named Perdita and Pongo. It's a cute cliffhanger for sure, and I definitely appreciate the reference. Not sure if it actually makes sense in this context, but we'll talk more about that in the next section. As for this section, that's just about every connection I could find with the versions of the story that came before it, and I've gotta say, I'm impressed with how much they managed to fit into a movie that wasn't supposed to be a remake. They included every major character except for the nanny. Granted, they changed their jobs and relationships with Cruella, but so did the other movies, so I can't justifiably take off points for that. They even included a bald assistant, though he's much less pathetic this time around.
Thank you. Now go, stand somewhere till I need you.
They definitely made Cruella crazy and act like a total asshole to the people helping her, which is pretty on brand, but I've gotta say, even at the end, she still does not feel like the same Cruella as the ones that came before, and that's where my problems with this movie start to emerge. So when I saw Cruella for the first time, I tried to have as open of a mind as possible. The only thing that was going to be a kiss of death for me was if they pulled the Maleficent and made her this misunderstood, sympathetic character who was really the victim the entire time, boo-hoo-hoo. And it makes me happy to say that while they did make Cruella a victim, there wasn't a point where I really felt sorry for her. In fact, there were plenty of moments where I thought she wasn't sympathetic and I straight up didn't like her. For example, whenever she was demeaning to Horace and Jasper, I thought, come on girl, that's your family. What's wrong with you? That being said, as crazy as she was, at no point did I think that she was evil, let alone evil enough to kill and skin 101 Dalmatians. And while out of context, it would sound really weird if I had a problem with someone not doing that. As I mentioned earlier, it was the character's entire purpose for being made. I mean, they find a creative way to incorporate that idea into this story, with them kidnapping the Baroness's Dalmatians and her pretending to make a coat out of them, then saying she's happy for people to think it was real and that she's a villain, but I honestly don't get why they did this. Wasn't this marketed as an origin story? How can that be the case when the thing Cruella is most known for never actually happens in this universe, but was just a publicity stunt? And to those of you saying, John, that wasn't supposed to be in place of 101 Dalmatians. That's why she gave Roger and Anita the puppies at the end. They're setting up a sequel. Here's my problem with that. The guy who apologizes to his chihuahua after calling him hideous doesn't strike me as a dog murderer, nor does the guy who's horrified when Cruella makes a joke about turning the Baroness's Dalmatians into coats. And if no one in that group is willing to put down these mongrels who literally killed Cruella's mom, what are the odds they're going to be comfortable stealing 101 Dalmatian puppies to make a coat out of? I'ma say 0%. And while I think it's super clever for her to have given Pongo and Perdita to Roger and Anita because it would explain why she feels so entitled to their puppies, if she isn't using them for coats, it's hard to say what she'll want them for. Maybe to use in displays or in a show to market the fake coat she made for the Big Bash? But if you think that's evil, I'd say you have a very low bar for what constitutes evil. I mean, the lyrics to her theme song are, if she doesn't scare you, no evil thing will. Yet she doesn't do anything truly villainous throughout this entire movie. I mean, her nemesis is way more like the classic Cruella than she is.
You wait, I'll get even.
I'll get even! Just wait! I'll get even! Just wait!
I just would have appreciated if, for once, Disney crossed that line into true anti-hero territory like David Chase did with Tony Soprano or Vince Gilligan did with Walter White. Those shows prove that it's totally possible to have a protagonist do something that's morally reprehensible while still making the audience root for them. I'm not saying she had to poison any children, but why couldn't she have done something horrible to the Baroness who absolutely would have deserved it? For crying out loud, in the cartoon, she tries to ram an innocent truck driver off a cliff because he's unknowingly smuggling her puppies back to Regent's Park. You're telling me that we couldn't have gotten a scene where a strung out Cruella goes crazy and runs over the Baroness with her car, or at the very least tries to? It would have been perfectly in line with what we know about the character and shown that she's actually capable of at least morally questionable behavior, besides being mean to her friends. But nah, let's make Cruella de Vil do the honorable thing and get the person who murdered her mother arrested. That's the exact kind of rational, long-term thinking she's known for, right? So let's say you're nothing like me. Let's say you can watch a movie like Cruella without the biases of your nostalgia and the attachment you develop from studying the book and prior movies for the entire month leading up to its release. You might say, you know, it's a different version of Cruella, but that's okay. Every variant of the story so far has played her a little different. And to that I would respond, sure, but at least those plots make sense. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the movie when I watched it for the first time, but upon a second and third viewing, I realized how massively flawed the story was. And no, I'm not talking about them turning Cruella de Vil into a genius secret agent Kim Possible at the end, though it definitely went down a notch for me there. What I am talking about is the whole mess with the family heirloom and birth certificate. I just can't wrap my mind around the specifics.
May I walk you through it?
He would have needed it to open the box that he stored her birth certificate in, right? Because it didn't look like he had time to get that notarized the night of. That means he would have had to keep the necklace, get the birth certificate made, seal it away, then meet up with Catherine to give her the necklace and have her hold on to it until Estella was old enough to accept the inheritance that she was owed. At which point she'd have to make contact with John so he could give her the lockbox that had her birth certificate. Now tell me, since the lockbox was obviously safe with John and the necklace key was virtually useless without it, why wouldn't he just hold on to both until the big day? Wouldn't that have been the safer thing to do? And shouldn't that be your priority when the life of a child is at stake? And let's talk about the Baron for a second, that poor guy. I cannot believe that John went through the effort of having a birth certificate made for Estella while also hiding that she was alive from her father, who was so depressed that he literally lost his will to live.
The Baroness said the child had died. Baron, he wasted away.
The mansion, the money, her reputation, the Baroness would have lost it all if the Baron found out the truth, kicked her to the curb, and took his daughter back. But then we wouldn't have a movie, so let's just rely on the old people are flawed excuse instead of the truth. Poorly thought out writing. I know, I'm being a little pretentious, and the plot holes I'm picking apart could easily be explained away in the sequel. I just have a feeling they won't be. And speaking of things that didn't get explained, what's with Cruella's hair? Why is it like that? I'll be honest, when John saved her life, I thought the plot twist was going to be that she was his daughter and that he's the one she inherited her hair color from. Yes, he's bald, but I thought it'd show a flashback where he had half black, half blonde hair, and that would have been epic. But no, they didn't even do that with the Baron. He had gray hair. I guess you could argue her hair was a bit of a mix between the Baron and Baronesses, but she's pretty distinctly blonde and black, not gray. Oh, and one more thing because I've got to get it out of my system. Catherine has the worst reflexes ever. She literally did not react to seeing those dogs running full clip at her. It wasn't until the lead one was springboarding off her chest that she even flinched. Look, I get it. If she had better reflexes and just dropped to the floor, the dogs would have gone sailing over the edge of the cliff. And while hilarious, we wouldn't have had a movie. But if your entire plot is ruined because you decided to make a character have base level reflexes, it's not a good plot. You're telling me that Horace could have climbed a 2-story rope in seconds, but Catherine couldn't have tucked tail? And And by the way, I'm speaking from experience here. When I was 7, I was mowed down by my neighbor's big fat Labrador, and even I had the reflexes to try and get out of the way when I saw him coming. And I sat the bench, for crying out loud. Anyway, if you want to boil my opinion of the movie down into a single sentence, it would be this: close, but no cigar. It's good if you don't think about it too much. Like I said though, that is just my opinion. I'm sure some of you agree, but there's probably a lot who don't. Regardless of which side you're on, feel free to comment your thoughts down below. I'd love to see if any of you can change my mind. And to everyone who isn't commenting, you don't have to feel left out. You can still like and subscribe, which are both great ways to support the channel, and make sure you get more of my content in your recommended feed. I say recommended feed because the sub box barely fucking works. And with that in mind, don't forget to follow me on social media. That's definitely the best way to stay updated on channel news and a great backup for YouTube's broken sub box. Also consider following my little puppers, Gunther and Penny. If you were a fan of Wink, you'll be a fan of them. I'll be seeing you all next week when we dive headfirst into more messed up origins. Until then, my name is John Solo, and remember, John shot first.